Hello, there's a few people here already. Sorry, just got Luxer on my glasses, and on the whole, I find it's easier to see people when I don't have Luxer on my glasses. I don't know about you, I can't eat Luxer without putting it everywhere. Okay, I don't know if you can hear me or not. You can? Good. I'm just not amusing. That's all. That's all I need to know. I got a few people here. We're even recording. Good, we'll stick with the recording just in case. How's everybody feeling? Yeah, I feel shit, to be perfectly frank. I have somehow in the last 24 hours got a cold, which is absolutely the last thing I need. Not that everybody ever needs to feel unwell, but yeah, anyway, not great timing. Oh, goodness me. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this working. As you can probably see by the charmingly placed ladder and books, I'm just about to do some renovations in here.
Here she is.
In theory, while I'm away, but yeah, just going a little bit slow. Anyway, so, okay, you've all got your mics off. Let's start. I don't even really know where to start today. Let's see what you want to do. A couple of different options. I like to start with some questions that you have. If you want to do that, if you have any questions, everybody has both, not only the OUA students, but the face-to-faces as well, have got results now for or feedback on their assignments. So that's good. That's, well, I hope it's good. I think it should be good. I was pretty pleased with them overall. I have not yet collated any overview feedback for anybody. I will try and do that for recording in tomorrow's class, but I am happy to answer general questions about that if you want to do that tonight. I am also ready, willing and able if you want to talk about the exam format. If we don't do that tonight, I will do that tomorrow. Chances are I'll be doing that tomorrow as well. And otherwise we can go into pretty much anything you want to go into. So I'm just going to open up the chat, see if there's anybody said anything in there. I've got somebody... Oh, sorry, somebody's texting me with the link. I'm just going to go back and say, look at the announcement. Sorry about this. It's basically a new link for everybody today because we had that problem last week and I wanted to get rid of it. Oh, Jackie, that's you. You're in. Ace. All right, I'm guided by you. Where do you want to start, guys? Have I got any questions to start with? Or any preferences for what you want to talk about or do?
I've got a question.
Oh, sorry, you're very silent there. Jackie, just give me a second to turn my...
Hey.
Oh, sorry, can you go ahead?
It's Kate, can you hear me?
Oh, it's Kate, sorry. It was green screening around Jackie down there. Sorry about that. Yes, I can hear you. Please share.
Just one question. In the terms and conditions for the exam, am I allowed to ask with specific reference?
You're allowed to ask anything. So, okay, let's just put a headline here so we're all talking about the same thing. So clearly you have in advance some terms and conditions in a scenario that is relevant to your exam. I will take questions about them, but I will reserve the right not to answer them if I think that they're not appropriate questions or that I'm doing the work for you.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a simple kind of grammar question. It's in 11.2, it says we may change the peak and off-peak times, but if the change is material, we will provide you with not less. What do you mean by material? Does that mean if it's minimal or
So as a general rule, so material is a word that is regularly judicially considered, but in general parlance, it means important. So if it's an important change or a significant change.
Okay.
So again, yeah, look, why don't I just spend a minute just talking about the structure of the exam, because I really don't want people bending themselves in knots doing things they don't need to do. Not suggesting that reading the contract from one end to the other is not an important thing to do and a really useful thing to do. But basically the exam structure works like this. You already have some scenario, some information about what's happening in Dennis's office, and you have a contract that was sent to Dennis. The reason for giving you those in advance is so that you don't have to waste valuable time in the exam trying to make sense of some relatively complex facts and a relatively complex and unfamiliar legal document. Yes, there are tricky things in it, absolutely. The contract itself, interestingly, I went on to the NBN recently, and the contract that they sent me, that's it. I just changed the name of the provider. Because it amused me, as a number of people have picked up, it may not in fact be an NBN provider contract at all. But at the end of the day, I've thought about that and thought, well, let's actually work out what that means. So I literally cut and paste the terms as they were provided to me from one of the largest internet services providers in this country. You guys are going to find things that are ridiculous in that contract that mean, you know, are either meaningless or inappropriate or difficult. And one of the reasons for doing that is because I want you to actually reflect back on how far you've come in the last 12 weeks, that I actually am entrusting you with a contract to read and make sense of. So having said that, I'm not a psychopath. I might be full of snot, but I am not a psychopath. I'm not actually setting out here to trick you in some bizarre way. What I am trying to do is get you to read a contract and apply it. So you've got this scenario, you've got a contract document, and then the exam has 7 or 8 questions in it, depending. I've had to write 4 lots of questions, right? Okay, so face-to-face exam, OUA exam, face-to-face deferred exam, OUA deferred exam, in the absolute hope that nobody actually has to do deferred exams. But sometimes, unfortunately, things go wrong on the way to the exam room or otherwise, and people need the opportunity through special consideration to do a later exam. So they're all written. They're all going to use exactly the same scenario. So there's lots of different questions. They might be things like, explain what this term means. They might be something to do with advising in relation to part of the scenario. Like, there will be questions that ask you to look at the scenario and advise, whether that's on common law, in relation to applicable statute, in relation to how that contract might apply, or some combination of any or all of those things. The reason for giving it to you in advance is not to make it ridiculously difficult. It's to provide more opportunity for you guys to show off in the exam, to show what you know and what you understand. But you're not going to get a question that is something that's not related to what we've done in class. Okay, so you're not going to need to calculate damages, for example. You're not going to have to think about any of the topics that haven't been covered. So don't, while interpretation in the sense of construction, reading what the agreement means, could be relevant, no single question would ever turn on you needing to know how the term material had been judicially considered or not. Okay, but you're absolutely right to go through and to read it from cover to cover and to make notes. Doing a bit of plain Englishing of that exam is a really good, sorry, not the exam, of the contract. Sorry, you can tell I'm full of snot, can't you? For what it's worth, as much as you guys are suffering now, clearly, you know, some greater goodness has decided to make me suffer with you. So no single question is going to turn on your immediate ability to interpret one clause. But it might ask you, for example, why might the provider have included a clause that does this? Or on what basis could the provider have claimed that it can charge in this particular way, or something like that? So it's asking you to do some lawyer skills, basically. I think you're going to have fun with it, personally. Well, as much as you can in an exam. I love the way most people turn their cameras off so I can't see their faces. But those brave ones there are just looking at me disbelieving. So is that helpful? Does that give you a sense of
yes,
what I've done?
Great, thank you very much.
And the reason for this is the first time I've structured the exam this way. It's actually taken me 12 months to get permission to do it because it is a little bit different. And the reason that I did it was I was finding that it was really hard to write an exam that gave all of you the opportunity to shine. And so to get an exam that was pitched at the right point where if you were competent and you'd done the work, you should be able to pass. But then there would be, to also allow for people to get high distinctions to really shine, what was happening is everybody was moving towards the middle because there just wasn't enough scope to really spread your wings and show off. But I think this exam will provide more breadth. Like it's, you know, it's not mind-numbingly hard so that it's impossible to pass. At the same time, it gives plenty of opportunity for those of you who work hard and naturally gifted, who love the world of contract law, or, you know, I don't know, some of you will be able to show off. I can't really imagine actually just being naturally gifted at contract law. It doesn't. But hey, if you are, if that's your thing, you should have the opportunity to fly, I say. All right, so having said that, any other questions you want to raise about the exam scenario or the contract itself? Remembering, if you think you're saving up your very tricky questions to hide them from your colleagues, that I will probably share them with everybody anyway. Hey,
I've got a question. Hey,
please.
This may have already been the question that was originally asked, and I just came in on the tail end, but I think it might be different. In terms of the all the different questions that are going to be asked in the exam, are they all going to be coming out of that factual scenario? There won't be other critical analysis questions that are just more general that don't pertain to that scenario?
They will have pretty much every question. I think every question links to the scenario or the contract or both in some way, but they could be very loose. In a number of cases, they'll be very indirect kind of linkages. So let me give you an example. Problem is, of course, I haven't read the exam today, so I don't remember what's on there or what's not, and there are 4 different versions of them. So please don't take any of this as Kath said this would be on the exam, and it wasn't. But let me give you an example of how I approached it when I wrote it. The question might say something like, clause 700 says that if you is a severance clause. Explain why you might include a severance clause and when it might apply, and draw on the common law as well. I have no idea whether I picked severance or not, but when we think back in over the scenarios that we've and the topics that we've covered, in a couple of different topics, we've talked about the when something might be severed from an agreement. So, for example, an illusory term, or where there's some kind of inconsistency, or where the Unfair Contracts Act applies. And so where a court basically says, in a choice, I'm not using the Latin here clearly, in a choice between finding something totally invalid and making sense of it, we will make sense of it. And so if we can sever out the offending provision and still make sense, then we'll do that. And so you might talk about, so a severance clause, if there is one in there, depending on how it works, a severance clause might actually do the opposite of that. Basically say, if any of these provisions are severed, then the whole agreement terminates. Or it might say, if one thing is severed, then the rest will continue. Again, depending on what it says. So you'll be asked to think about why include that clause. What might the history be of including that clause? Like what's the legal reasoning of the draftsperson in including it, etc. Does that help? That's requiring critical analysis. It might even be a really broad question, like the one you had to an extent in the second assignment, which is even if there is no statute of frauds reason for including or requiring a written document, what are the reasons for having a written document? So again, that kind of question has come up a few times. So critical analysis questions in particular might be only very indirectly linked to the scenario. The other thing that might happen too, and does happen on at least one or two versions of this exam, is I might then add a couple of sentences of more facts, something that happened afterwards or that wasn't in the first lot of facts, and ask you to say, so for example, might have a question about something and then say, would your answer be different if Dennis was a listed company? Or would if Dennis turned out to be mentally unstable, or if Dennis was drunk when he was on the phone, how would you deal with X, Y, Z and Y? So again, could be very loose. Any more? It's not like you all to be shy. It's funny, you all started out chatty this semester, and then towards the end of the semester, I don't know, is it winter? That seemed to happen on first semester last year too. Is it that as it gets dark and colder, you do too? That was a bit judgy, wasn't it? Oh, my beloved has turned the heating on in this room because I'm like layered up because of my cold, and now I'm too warm, so. Oh. All right, well, we could do some revision problems if you want to. We'll require some, okay, let me just find my slides pack. We'll do a couple of little scenarios. These ones are old-fashioned stop and write some things down and then talk to us type ones. Just let me open it up. Contract law, week 12. Revision questions, yay. All right, just going to take a bit of downloading. And we are just going to, oh, come on, sorry. I need to display settings, swap presenter, and then I need to do that, and then I need to share. Okay. Pick a pop culture icon that amuses you, and we'll do a question. First in, best dressed.
Marsha.
Which one?
Marsha.
Marsha. Let's have a look. All right, so you should be able to see this on the board here. So Marsha has entered into a contract with Cindy, who's a landscape architect. Didn't you just wonder what she grew up to do? And agreed to have Cindy landscape her back garden. In the course of negotiations, Marsha inquired in writing of Cindy what would be the best plants to grow on her back fence, an area in complete shade. Sorry for the typo on that slide, I only just saw it. Cindy replied in writing and advised Marsha of 3 possibilities, including the planting of olive trees, saying they would be the best of the 3 options, and saying, I would estimate that you would be able to pick olives within 2 years if you plant them in that position. The formal agreement was subsequently entered into using Cindy's standard form agreement, and Marsha chose olive trees for planting on the back fence. The contract did not include any reference to the statements about the olive trees beyond specifying them for planting. It did, however, include a broadly drawn exclusion clause that states that Cindy is not liable for any loss or damage arising as a consequence of Marsha's failure to water the plants. 2 years later, most of them have died because they had insufficient sunlight. So what I want you to do now, I've got a lovely little clock here that I could run, which would just terrify you because it makes noise and everything. But I'm actually going to go backwards and just say, okay, looking at that, just quickly scroll down some bullet points about how you would approach that problem. Think about how to use IRAC, and then we'll have a chat about it. So I'm only going to give you a minute or 2 to do that. I'm dancing to the invisible music in the room. Okay, what do we think? Just starting at the beginning, I've noticed in the chat, sorry, I'm notoriously bad at looking at chat while I'm talking, but Fabian has offered in first case that he's noticed, which is similar, and put up JJ Savage and Sons, and that's absolutely right. So good case. So what does it tell us? How do we apply it? I'm going to let you type in there, Fabian, because you don't have a microphone. What other, while I'm waiting for him to do that, what about the rest of you? Tell me what you think. Tell me how you approached it. I know it's scary doing that, but there are real benefits to actually putting your mouth or your words to what you've done, because it is really, really easy to just sit back and then say, oh, yeah, that's what I would have done. By actually committing to trying to get an answer to the question, even if you're on the wrong track, then at least you know that's how you learn. And I actually think you guys, this is a very strong group. I know I've just spent 4 quality days reading your words. I know that this is a strong group that thinks deeply. So I know you don't like being put on the spot, but have a go.
I'll say something. So when I was just reading it, the key things that I picked up was that it was a standard form agreement, that there was an exclusion clause, that the contract was in effect, like it had been signed. And so I would look at, given all of that, is the clause, the exclusion clause, an unfair term? Well, number one, is it a term? The exclusion clause is a term in the contract, which is different from the statement that Cindy made about the olive trees. So that's kind of one thing. And the other thing would be just kind of like ruling out that that was even a term in the contract. So that's probably where I'd start, is look at whether or not she actually, there was a term. And I would say that no, it was an opinion.
So there's a list of things there, and I think you're absolutely on the right track here. So firstly, can we have an exclusion clause at all? So that's going down the line of, well, there's 2. One is the written term inconsistent with the promise that was made to induce the contract? JJ Savage and Blakely, Oscar Chess, Dick Bentley, that suite of cases helps us work out whether or not an express term can be brought into the contract, or is it just a term made to induce somebody into a contract, and is it promissory? So all of that stuff is relevant. The next part that we need to look at is what happens when there's a document that's in writing that says one thing and it's inconsistent with what had been said previous. So that's the parole evidence rule, and we can go down that line. Then thirdly, and this is it's particularly good to notice, is it something that legislation applies to? Is this a contract that might be covered by the Australian consumer law? So firstly, is there an implied term or an implied guarantee, for example, that the services will be fit for purpose, and particularly if a purpose is known to the supplier of services, I want to have some trees on my back fence where it's very sunny. Is there a guarantee in relation to that? And if there is, can that be excluded in the contract? And the answer to that, Section 64, is usually no. And then the last one is also, is there a potential for this term to be excluded because it's an unfair term? And given it's a standard form contract, you might want to go down on that direction. Anything else? So, I mean, I've added some bits into the way that you are approaching it, but effectively there's actually a reasonable amount of meat in this question, bizarrely. So let me, just move on. I won't go through clicking that. So I'm not going to give you this slide back until after tomorrow, but as you can probably see how it works, I've got a whole heap of just little questions in there, with then some little summary answers like this. They're not even proper answers, really. They're just different things that you could go down. Now, I can see how with a problem question like this, I could get 2 very different answers that don't even overlap and still get high distinctions, because there are kind of 2, there's a common law and a statutory way that you can approach it, and it really would depend on a range of different things. So again, so what have I said in here? Analogous to JJ Savage. You might talk about Nifsan and Buskey. Actually, we haven't did we speak about Nifsan and Buskey in class last week? Yes, we did, didn't we? That's the Queensland development case. You're looking blank at me. I'm pretty sure we did. We spoke about the one where the buskies went up with the sales agent in the building next door and had a look at the view. Yep. JJ Savage, the word estimate, standard form contracts, provisions in the Australian consumer law. Ultimately, I think whichever way you go, it's likely that Marsha doesn't actually have a strong case. And clearly I had way too much time on my hands when I was putting this slide pack together because almost all of them have gifts. Want to try getting a bit lost in space? Oh, blah, 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 blah. Clearly I haven't cleaned this up since last time I was there. Wasn't really expecting, whoops. I've clearly drawn on it last time I was in class. See if that helps you at all. Don't worry, you won't get an exam with my scribble on it. So Dr. Smith recently discussed the purchase of a small farm on the south coast of Victoria with his friend Will Robinson, who'd only ever used the house as a place as a holiday house. Will said that he'd accept a 10% deposit for the purchase. Dr. Smith explained that he needed to take possession immediately because he had nowhere else to live. At no time was there any document signed. Dr. Smith paid the deposit and Will gave him the keys. The next day, Dr. Smith moved in. Dr. Smith quickly began various home improvements, building a secret laboratory for building robots and establishing a vineyard on the premises. Will now wants Dr. Smith to leave the farm. I want you to advise Will. And there's no extra points for reading my messy handwriting, which says certainty, formality, consideration, part performance. You'll need, I was clearly making those notes as somebody was talking last time around. Let's have a go. What can you add in?
So definitely statute of frauds applies because there's...
But you just muted your microphone again, Nia.
Oh, sorry, that was just my like off the cuff.
Yeah, we're having trouble with your sound.
That statute of frauds is going up, legislation.
So this is an example where there is a requirement for writing. So even if we have a contract, if we meet the other elements, that contract will only be enforceable if it's in writing because of Section 126 of the Instrument Act. Think about that when you're expressing that too. Yes, it is a statute of fraud requirement, but be specific about where the requirement comes from. For those of you who are in OUA territory, and you could be anywhere in the world, I'm actually got very little information from our friends in the online world as to where they're located this time around. So I know some of you are in Melbourne, but you could be anywhere. But basically the laws of Victoria are your starting place. And so Section 126 of the Instruments Act will be relevant. So, acting for Will, what are you thinking? Any of you want to mount an argument for the basis on which Will could get Dr. Smith to leave the farm? What about you, Kevin? You work in property. What are your thoughts on this one?
I think Dr. Smith has to leave the farm.
He has to leave the farm. You don't think he has a strong case?
No.
So what arguments would you bring on behalf of Will for that, to demonstrate that?
Because there's simply no contract signed. And
So
there's
no contract
nothing,
signed.
yeah, there's nothing in writing. So if it's related to a property, then there's nothing to be done.
So what difference does it make that he has actually paid some money? What would happen with that money?
It can be refunded.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably should be refunded. There's no contract. We go back to effectively the contract can't be enforced. So then the question becomes, well, what is the end result of that? There are a couple of things that make it a little bit tricky. The question of part performance could arise, but we don't know. Haven't got enough information there to know whether Will requested those improvements, the secret lab, the vineyard. A case that might be worth having a look at, it's quite analogous in some ways to Beaton and McDivitt. But in Beaton and McDivitt, there was a specific request that the person, or whoever it is, the plaintiff ultimately, came onto the land and used it for permaculture. I don't know. Sorry, that case always, I keep wanting to go into that case and find out more about it. I know that there was a falling out between the parties over a Tai Chi dispute. And I just amuses me to know more. Fabian saying if there's a requirement for writing, then surely there's no contract and Dr. Smith would have to leave. The deposit would need to be paid back. And then you're moving into property law space, which I don't really want you to move into. So I will come to part performance, Jackie, in just a second. The thing is, we have to remember that formality is not a contract element, Fabian. It goes to whether the contract can be enforced, not whether or not there's a contract at all. So that brings me to the part performance element, that equity will not assist a volunteer. But if a party has performed part of its obligations under a contract in reliance on or in the under the understanding that they are bound to do so under a contract and that they're going to get some reward under the contract for doing so, then their equity is more likely to find some relief. So you would probably be able to, it's in that way that if Will was kicked off the land because there was no contract, that equity would assist Dr. Smith to be compensated for the work that he'd done and refunded the deposit. And there would be an inequity in allowing Will to rely on the failure to document the agreement as a mechanism for just holding on to the deposit. Does that answer your question, Jackie, about part performance in that context? Good to hear, good to see. Let me see what other points I've made in relation to that one. Oh, even nicely set out. Intention, good friends, social relationship. We all know, I think we all understand that's not really a big deal, that it's pretty easy to swap the onus of intention there. So it's really, the presumption is in a social relationship that it wasn't meant to be binding, wasn't meant to be enforceable. But the onus is on the party seeking to demonstrate that there was no intention to have a contract to prove that. So in this case, Will might say, well, we didn't document it. He had nowhere else to live. We hadn't actually settled the rest of the terms. You don't have enough information to know that, but I was happy if he gave me a deposit to let him on the land. I don't know. Consideration, analogous to Beaton and McDivitt, we mentioned that a second again. Certainty is difficult too, very hard to identify all of the essential terms there. The facts we have are really not enough. It says he's given him a deposit. It was 10%. 10% of what? Had they actually agreed a price? Actually, was it 10% or did I just make that up? I've read a few. He would accept a 10% deposit for the purchase. In fact, it doesn't actually say whether or not they agreed a price or whether that deposit was paid, does it? When I look at it again here. The rules, relevant, homogeneous, beaten, statute of frauds. You might distinguish McDivitt on the basis that the activities might be improvements, but there was no evidence that they were asked for. Even so, in McDivitt, the majority found that there was no consideration anyway. So, no danger. Will Robinson. Kevin, I think you are, ultimately your conclusion is correct, but you will need to fill out some more detail as to how to get there. Let's have a look at this one. Take a minute, each of you, and think about this. Can you legally be bound to keep a promise to give someone a gift? And if so, how? Those of you who are hoping that people who love you will give you the presents that you've been asking for are particularly anxious to find the answer to this. Can you Sorry, go on now.
Sorry. Well, the thing that pops out at me first is there sufficient consideration, in which case there would have had to have been an exchange of promises in order for that to be the case.
And the nature of a gift is no consideration. Fabian's basically said the same thing. Anybody think of a way that they could bind somebody to keep their promise to give them a gift? Let's think about a commercial scenario where it might arise. For example, say the university the university regularly gives prizes to students who do exceptional work. And they put up the details of their kind of competition, I guess, what you need to do. And if you get overall the highest GPA of all law students who are graduating with you, you will receive the medal, the Supreme Court medal for your cohort. And that comes with some really exciting prizes. I don't know what they are. Most likely, I don't know, some Play-Doh and some Lego and a little badge that says, I need to get a life. I have no idea what the prizes are, but I am quite sure that there might be a basis on which you could require the giving of that prize if you qualified. A gavel? Yeah, definitely there should be a gavel. And photocopy toner. A first-year supply of photocopy toner. I might actually see if I can sponsor that prize myself. Now, the scenario I gave you quite possibly involves consideration. That, in fact, I think I've described a unilateral contract where there's effectively an offer to give a prize to a person who meets the one person. It's an offer to a particular cohort, but it's the first one or the person who achieves the highest. So again, a prize is slightly different from a gift. Bonuses at work in a similar sort of way. Not exactly the same as a gift, but what about a gift? I think deed is probably the easiest way to do it. So, and again, when you think about a will is effectively the creation of a trust or a binding requirement for the estate to distribute assets in a particular way, and there is no quid pro quo there. But it's still a form of contract technically. So yeah, don't forget about deeds is the lesson with that one. That just because you don't have consideration doesn't mean that there isn't a way to do it. One more? Any takers of anything in particular? Frankenfurter, you've got it, my favourite. Brad agrees to lend some money to Frank, provided that Janet guarantees Frank's performance under a loan agreement. Brad and Janet have been friends for a long time and Brad trusts her word. He asks you whether he should prepare a guarantee agreement or not. What advice would you give him? Oh, Brad. So particularly here, I'm looking for some case law to illustrate the answer. Get a pen, write it down. What's the issue? What's the law? How does it apply? What do you conclude? Okay, what about you, Tracy? I'm going to call on you. Where are you going to start with this one?
I'm still thinking.
Sorry, I'm mean, aren't I? Because I can't see your face. I have no idea where you're feeling about it. What about you, Will? Where are you going with this one?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm still sort of thinking it through. I know roughly where it sits in the topics, but just trying to work it out.
Okay, I'm mean, aren't I?
Oh, not quite. I think that's fair.
Are you happy to think out loud?
Not quite. Not that's now mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who is happy to think out loud? What about you, Tina?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, what are you thinking? Take me through your thinking pattern here.
I think probably, yeah, it's like I'm not sure if Janet can give any guarantee because it could like a bank guarantee, and I think, yeah, not sure.
And that's okay. Look, this is a tricky question. So how about I think out loud? And I looked at this one for a while myself, but where would I start? Okay, firstly, I need to understand what a guarantee is. Okay, so a guarantee is effectively what's happening here is Brad is saying, before I lend money to you, Frank, I need Janet to promise me that if you don't meet your obligations under the loan, that she will guarantee your obligations. And in class, we spoke about the difference between a guarantee and an indemnity. So a guarantee basically means, and this is maybe somewhere where in an exam, you might be picking up your legal dictionary and just having a quick look at guarantees, just reminding yourself what they are. And it might refer to an indemnity in there as well. You might want to look at both, be able to address both. So a guarantee basically means that if Brad doesn't meet his obligations under the contract, if Frank doesn't meet his obligations under the contract, then Janet has to step in and do that. So The other thing that might remind us of is the Statute of Fraud Successor in Victoria, Section 126 of the Instrument Act, which specifically includes guarantees amongst the form of arrangement that needs to be in writing if somebody's ever going to be sued on it. So we do have that as part of our toolkit here. Another thing that stands out looking at it, Brad and Janet have been friends for a really long time. So we might actually also think about intention here. And the intention element of it is one of the things, again, it's a bit sloppily worded. This is actually, I changed the names because they always have funny names in really old exams. I think this is one from a very old exam and I just changed them to names of people I could imagine. But Brad and Janet have been friends, and then it asks you whether you should prepare a guarantee agreement, or maybe that would be better expressed as a guarantee document. And so again, the fact that the two of them are friends means that we want to be really clear on intention. So a document is helpful with that. If it's just a contract that we make in passing, we can make a verbal agreement. Particularly amongst friends, if we want to make sure that intention's there, that having a formal agreement will help with that, eradicate that issue. But then secondly, Section 126 says, in relation to guarantees, we need one for it to be enforceable. But then the third part of that is actually there are some really good reasons why you might want to have the serious obligation documented anyway, just for clarity, consistency, etc. Anybody else want to weigh in? Anybody else got some other thoughts?
Hi, Kath. I was just thinking, is the letter of comfort relating to this?
Yeah, well, in fact, probably if we're acting for Brad here, we don't want a letter of comfort, do we? We want something that actually makes it clear that if Frank defaults, that Janet has to step in. What's interesting with guarantees, if it turns out, the other piece of advice I'd probably be giving Brad is make sure that your loan agreement is enforceable. Because if you don't have an enforceable loan agreement, then there won't be any obligation that Janet has to support. And so you won't get any benefit going to the guarantor. Where if it's a guarantee and indemnity, and Janet is both guaranteeing Frank's performance, but indemnifying Brad against any loss as well, then he's more likely to be properly covered. And I don't know about you, but I think Frankenfurter looks like he might be a bad credit risk. Just saying. So I'm recognising too that I've got a few people in here where I'm using very much pop culture references from the 80s, basically. My people, where I came from in Australia. So a number of these references will mean nothing to you. And by the way, nothing ever turns on that. I just find it's easier to imagine people if you've got some reference. But so I pick references I know, but I'm always happy to be inspired by you as to which characters I should use. Yeah, anything here? Advantages to documenting, Instruments Act. Don't think there's anything else I want to say there. All right, I actually reckon we've got time for one more if you want to go for it. Why don't we just spend a bit of time with William Shakespeare here? Antonio signed an agreement with Shylock, a lender, to finance the purchase of a 3D printer. The form Antonio signed was expressed to operate as an offer from Antonio, that was irrevocable for 7 days and not binding on the lender until Shylock signed it. The form was returned to Shylock's office. The 3D printer was delivered to Antonio. Shylock processed and noted on the form that the offer was accepted, but acceptance itself wasn't communicated to Antonio, who found out that the 3D printer was entirely unsatisfactory for printing a rocket ship. So he returned it to the dealer before any instalments were paid. Shylock has brought in action to require Antonio to make payments. What common law? Now, this is important in an exam question. If it just says common law, I'm not interested in what the statute's going to say. And if it says ACL or statute, I want to hear what the statute says, okay? So what rights might Antonio have at common law in this scenario? Fabian, I like your thinking here. LaTeX Finance and Knight is absolutely an analogous case. And can you see how Fabian's doing that? He's looking at the scenarios and saying, okay, is there an analogous case here? And then the next part is, does it apply or can I distinguish it in some way? And Fabian's gone straight to the acceptance not being conveyed. And that ultimately was LaTeX downfall in that case and may well be Shylock's downfall here. If you're going to structure something so that if a vendor structures their arrangements so that they have an invitation to treat, which is then framed so that the customer makes an offer on the terms set out in the invitation to treat, that gives the vendor the control by it can accept or reject. But the courts have said, and quite clearly in LaTeX, if you're going to do that, then you have to follow through. You have to communicate the acceptance. You can't have your protection cake and eat it too. Anything else there? What about you, Wen? What do you think?
I'm thinking according to the ACL consumer law and probably the irrevocable for 7 days is not reasonable, and
yeah, look, that's the reason. So you're actually looking at the unfair terms provision.
Yeah. Yes.
So effectively, it's an irrevocable offer.
Yeah.
The issue that you might have, yeah, I agree with you, it's possibly not reasonable. That would be a good argument. You have been asked here to look at the common law, probably for that reason. I would not be penalising, but do be careful reading the question. So the one piece of advice I'm going to give you over and over again is answer the question. Check the question that's been asked and answer that question. Each time. But again, we want to talk about legal issues in a much more general sense here because I want your brains to be working. The thing is, this is in an exam, you just don't know where the problems are going to fall from, and they might not stick with one topic. You know, you might be finding that there are issues that cross over from one topic to another. And I think that's really good thinking. Oh, have you paid your school fees, young lady joining us today? No, you're very welcome.
Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you for letting us take so much of your mum's time over the last semester. All right, anybody else want to weigh in anywhere with that one? Other than how cool would it be to 3D print a ship? And a rocket ship, mind you. Just saying, like, let's get with the new technology. Sorry, there we go. What else is there? Oh, the last one, actually, that's probably me just amusing myself. Capacity might also be an issue because are you actually a sane person if you are buying a finance 3D printer for the purpose of interstellar travel? I'm not sure. Antonio's likely to be successful. You'd want to examine the form to check whether Shylock had any rights to accept without notifying before confirming your advice. Again, that comes straight from LaTeX. LaTeX says, yeah, sure, you can break the rules if you want to, but you have to be explicit about it. And yes, your point exactly when, already there. Okay, I barely have a voice. It's 7:30. What we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to continue on there with some more of these questions. And with the help of people in the room, we are going to try the impossible. We're going to try and go around contract law in 40 slides. You've heard about Around the World in 40 days. We're going to try and, in 40 slides, summarise everything I think you need to know for the exam for contract law. I've never got it down to 40 yet. I think 43 is my record. Let's see what I can do. I will also give you an overview presentation of the exam itself. So we've got quite a lot to do tomorrow as well. And I will be busting my boiler to get recordings of this and tomorrow night's class up for you lovely online people as soon as I possibly can. I'm pretty proud of myself actually with that this year. I think there's only been one time when it's been more than 24 hours after giving myself 48 hours and giving you online people an extra 48 hours on everything as well. But I'm pretty sure I should be able to do that on Tuesday. The other thing I'm going to do is circulate. I have for the assignments I marked most recently. I've included some contact details for me while I'm overseas, but I'll make sure I get those around to everybody tomorrow. If you have questions, concerns, frustrations, compliments, or you just like my hair, feel free to contact me. Do not be shy. I will not necessarily get to you straight away. If I get a sense that you're stressed, I will. I have to say, and actually there's somebody in this room who knows this and who's tried to contact me a number of times through the Canvas email, and I don't know what it is, but it doesn't always tell me I've got it. And so I haven't always noticed those, and it's even worse if you put a reply to an announcement or something. So if you really want my feedback, send me an email, send me a text, send me a WhatsApp message. Because I don't mean to miss the stuff in Canvas, but you can imagine how many things there are in Canvas. And if you just reply to something and it doesn't trigger a notification for me, I just won't see it because I'm not there all the time, which I'm sorry about, but it's better you know that than wait for me and think I don't love you, because I do. All right. Questions, concerns, frustrations?
Hi, Kath, it's Kevin. Can I just ask a quick question?
Of course you can.
I'm just reading the capacity chapter, and because we did the terms and conditions last week, I'm just thinking if minors, say for example, if there are many minors going to a concert, and this, would you consider the concert tickets are necessary goods for the minors? And if they are not, if say for example Justin Bieber's concert, and there's hundreds of minors who bought the ticket, if Justin Bieber didn't turn up, can all the people ask for the refund because it's not necessary for them? And if that's the case, how can the vendor, how can the people who's selling the tickets avoid things like this from happening? And what kind of terms and conditions can they put in the tickets, and it's not in the violation of the consumer law?
So, excellent question. In a nutshell, whether something is a necessary or not there's not a one size fits all. So when you go back and work out what a necessary is, it will depend on the minor and their station in life. So an example I used in class was school uniform to a fancy private school might be a necessary for a kid who goes to that fancy private school, but will not be a necessary for his mate who lives in the same street who doesn't go to that school. Whether or not somebody has capacity doesn't go to whether a contract has been formed or not. It goes to who it can be enforced against. So in your example of the Justin Bieber concert, whether it's a necessary or not will depend on the minor's station in life. And I've, having lived with teenagers, there are certain things that they would definitely argue, concert tickets in particular, that are necessary for their station in life. Certainly mobile phone contracts, they would insist on as being necessary to their station in life. But the question goes to, if it's not a necessary, it can't, the question goes to whether it can be enforced against the minor. So the Justin Bieber ticket scenario you speak of, if Justin doesn't show up, then the Beliebers have a right to get their money back in accordance with the terms on the ticket. So the ticket, in fact, what would normally happen to be consistent with the Australian consumer law is that if the concert was cancelled, they would have a right to get their money back less the ticketing fee, which is often why the ticketing fee is separate. So the administration costs of buying that ticket. I always think it's it's a bit slack when they don't get interest as well, because all that money is sitting in somebody else's bank account. But anyway, and it's all insured. But if the Belieber, for whom it's not a necessary, doesn't show up, can Justin sue them for not showing up to his concert? Now, well, why would he? That's kind of ridiculous. But I guess it would be embarrassing to be, I don't know, doing whatever he does in an empty stadium. Can he sue them? And the answer is, if it's not a necessary, no, he couldn't. So if, for example, he had a troupe of dancers who worked on all of his shows, some of whom were underage, they didn't show up for work. It's a bit nebulous because of rules about specific performance with humans, but he might be able to sue them if they didn't form part of their contract, because it's a necessary, if they were beneficial contract of service, for example, he was teaching them to dance or, I don't know, to be superstars, whatever it is. But if a school group of volunteer amateur dancers were going to show up at the concert to do something and they didn't show, it's unlikely that that element would be a performance, that would be a necessary. And I think he would have difficulty suing in that circumstance. I might have stretched your analogy further than it was really comfortable going, but I think that's the point with capacity, is remembering it goes to, if there's a lack of capacity, it doesn't mean that the person lacking capacity can't enforce their rights under the contract. It's just that the other side can't enforce obligations that a person lacking capacity might have signed up to. So how do you avoid this? Largely, if you're dealing with minors, you get the money up front. You don't enter into longer term arrangements where you give them something and that they're going to pay for later. It's probably the easiest way to deal with that.
Okay. Yeah, that answers my question.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? Well, I can't wait to see you tomorrow, largely because there'll be big sleep between now and then, and hopefully I will be feeling a lot better. But yeah, tomorrow is our last time together. So yeah, it'll be bittersweet. You've been a great group to work with. So I will be looking forward to seeing those of you who are in class tomorrow and getting a recording out to the rest of you as soon as I possibly can. See you later, alligators.
Thanks, Kath.
Thank
Pleasure.
you so much, Kath. Bye.
And I just need to find out where I go stop. meeting.